Welcome, friends. It is good to see so many of you here to come together around such an important topic, though I am personally sorry that such a conversation continues to be needed in our nation. I am Laurie Norton Moffatt, Director and CEO of Norman Rockwell Museum, and thank you, Jenn Smith, who is well known and beloved in our Berkshire community through her work at the Berkshire Eagle, for agreeing to moderate today's community conversation. The events of these past weeks, sparked by the merciless killing of George Floyd by police violence, following the stream of deaths of so many of our brothers and sisters of color, have struck a national chord of anguish, anger, frustration, grief, despair. Each of us is asking, how can we individually and organizationally make a difference to create a more equitable and just world and become an anti-racist society? Many are also asking, why did it take yet one more horrific death captured on video to awaken the nation to action? If not for the video, would anyone have paid attention to one more casual killing of a Black man? Those of us with memory of the civil rights movement ask, how can we be here again when so much hard work, peaceful protest, as well as sacrifice of life in pursuit of racial equality and justice was led by both ordinary and extraordinary people 3 generations ago to create a more just world? Today, so many are tired and simply despairing, asking what will it take to awaken the conscience of our nation to reject racism? Why have this conversation at Norman Rockwell Museum? To talk about this question and other matters of social and civic importance, such as immigration, healthcare, and the environment, and so many more, the museum has convened a decade-long running series of town hall freedom forums inspired by Norman Rockwell's art and humanity. These town hall meetings invite the community to come together in conversation and around topics of social justice. We hope these forums give people opportunity to deepen understanding, to listen, to open minds, and develop the tools and ability to hold these conversations in their own community gathering spaces, a place to practice expressing words and thoughts without fear of embarrassment or missteps. These conversations are hard, and we must practice to move beyond the divisions of our nation. Museums are places of social gathering, of contemplation, of inspiration and ideas. Art and visual images, and especially illustration art, which shapes and reflects society, serve to spark conversation and elicit a call for action. Norman Rockwell did this powerfully through his art, and at no time more poignantly than during the civil rights movement 60 years ago, when he used his artist voice in a call for action to redress the wrongs of racial injustice. Joining us today are 2 of our nation's most eloquent contemporary visual voices, illustrator Jerry Pinkney and cartoonist Liza Donnelly, longtime friends of Norman Rockwell Museum, who through their imagery offer us a great deal to think about our nation's history as well as current events. And we express our gratitude to our panelists, Rockwell Museum Trustees Roberta McCulloch and Pittsfield Chief of Police Mike Nguyen, and community leaders Brooke Bridges and Gwendolyn Van Sant, whom Jen will introduce in a moment, for their generosity, their courage, and personal sacrifice, for their willingness to bear the additional weight of holding this community conversation during a time that has triggered deep personal pain, grief, and pent-up emotion, burdens that they each have carried over a lifetime. I'm so personally grateful for their leadership and friendship to share with candor their thoughts and thus offer to all of us tools for conversation about race and hopes for creating a just world. Norman Rockwell Museum offers this community conversation in the spirit of the power of collaboration to create a more inclusive and just community. We must never give up. It is each of our duty to stand for others in the face of injustice, and we must never stop trying. So welcome to the forum.
Thank you so much, Laurie. And thank you again for all our participants, whether you're here as panelists, whether you're here as guest in this virtual yet sacred space of learning and of dialogue. As Laurie indicated, these times have tried us in so many ways. And so I thought I'd like to open the conversation, open this panel by asking everyone here to take a moment to think of one word that describes what you're feeling right now. So take a moment to do that. And as you have that word come to mind, I invite you all, as some panelists or some participants have already savvily used the chat box. And if you feel so moved, I invite you all on the count of 3 to unmute and just say what you're feeling so we can hear everyone's voices. So if you're ready, you've got your mouse on that unmute button, and we'll give this a go. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Awake.
Grief.
Acceptance.
Exhaustion.
Tired.
Hopeful.
Hope.
And for those in our audience who are typing in the chat, I'll read out loud for everyone's benefits. I see words like conflicted, outrage, angry, scared, perplexed, love, tired, pain, hopeful, heartbroken. I think we've all experienced these spectrum of emotions over the past few months, maybe for the past years. Maybe you've been feeling this all of your life. That's very valid. And so as we prepare to have this conversation tonight, I'm going to also ask you to do something together, just to again help generate the energy and the notion of respect for one another in this room. So if we could just take a moment to sit in a comfortable position, and we'll ask you all to take a collective breath. So we'll inhale together to the count of 3, 2, 3, and exhale. Thank you. Another unorthodox thing I will do is, instead of reading bios, because we have such a luminous panel that would take all night, but I'm going to introduce our panelists by name and briefly by their role, but I'm going to invite them to share with you, and each panelist, you'll have 2 minutes to share with our audience a little bit about your lived experience, whether it's how you identify professionally, socially, culturally, and what's drawn you to this table today. You know, what you're hoping to learn from others, or what you're learning about yourself in this moment. And so I'm going to make introductions as you've seen in your event program. And so I'd like to first announce Brooke Bridges, who is a newer joined member to our community, our Berkshire community, and she is the founder and CEO of Building Bridges, SEL, which stands for Social Emotional Learning. Welcome, Brooke.
Thank you so much, Jen. So hi, yeah, my name is Brooke Bridges, and a little about my lived experience. So I grew up in Los Angeles, California, and I grew up actually as a child actress. So I acted all the way up since I was in diapers into my 20s. And I found myself, I'm half black and half white, I'm biracial, I'll give you context there. And I found myself really desiring to assimilate. You know, I wanted straight hair. I hated my curly hair. I wanted, you know, to just be skinnier and just assimilate into what I thought was beautiful and ideal, which for me was what we saw on TV mostly, which was being white. And so for me, after I moved to the Berkshires, which was about 3 years ago, I spent the summer at Soulfire Farm, which is a farm in upstate New York that is dedicated to bringing Black people back to the land. And I realized that I was Black. I knew this, I have Black family, but I had never really embraced my Blackness before until this past summer. And so now I'm standing as a Black woman in this community, and I see all the Black faces in this community, and I see that it is my duty as someone who knows about mental health and someone who is able to articulate the needs of myself as well as the people around me to be here in this context to provide assistance and, you know, just support, and for children and adults alike, for all of them. So, and support for myself too. So thank you. I appreciate being here.
Thank you so much, Brooke, and we really look forward to, you know, discussing that more and what you're seeing and hearing and how you're helping others. Our next panelist I'd like to introduce is Liza Donnelly. You may recognize her name, or better yet, her images that were on some of the slides as a signature of her work with the New Yorker. She is also part of a movement of her own that she's been taking up in her daily practice as what I love this title. It's called a Cartoonist for Peace. And so Liza, please tell us more about that and more about yourself.
Thank you. It's great to be here. It's an honor. So I wrote some things down, and I'm just going to read it because it's easier for me to remember everything I wanted to say. As you said, I'm a cartoonist and a writer, and I've been with the New Yorker magazine for 40 years, but I work for other places as well. And I'm a charter member of an international organization called Cartooning for Peace that seeks, you know, as a group, we seek to spread understanding and dialogue through global cartoons. So that's what that is. It's all over the world. So for context, I was thinking about, because you gave us this question yesterday, the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King may have been the day that I sort of felt defined who I am. I was 13, and with his death, I sort of grew up. I didn't understand his death, and I still don't. You know, like, what is this hate and why would somebody want to kill such a wonderful man? I grew up in Washington, D.C., and he was a hero of mine, and he gave me hope. I could feel the tension in the city as a young person, and he gave me hope, and then he was taken away. He was silenced by a white man, and I knew I was white, and it confused me. And I was drawing cartoons then as a young person, but I didn't draw about Dr. King. But I think it was at that time I started many years of searching for ways to use my art to speak to important things, and how to use that skill to help others. And I'm still looking for that. I'm constantly looking for that. I need to become an anti-racist, and I want to know how to do that in my drawings. And how can drawing speak to end injustice? Is that possible? The drawings that you showed in the slideshow are some that I've done over the past few weeks in response to the events sparked by George Floyd's murder. And over the course of each day, along with other ones that we didn't show, I live draw these images as I'm speaking, and I put them on, and it's on social media. So I'm sensing what's going on around me in the world, and also my own feelings. So I'm trying to combine that in and doing these drawings. So that's what those are. And they're very different than my other work, but I'm just exploring how I can be better with my art and how I can contribute more effectively. So
Thank you so much, Liza. It's not easy to say that out loud and say that you have to do the work. So thank you for saying that and sharing a bit about, we're all figuring out how to do the work, right? And so thank you for giving context to your process. Next up, we have Gwendolyn Van Sant, who's the co-founder and CEO of Bridge. Some of you may know it as Multicultural Bridge, but now it's just Bridge. And Gwendolyn's been doing what she's been doing for a long time. So why don't you explain that to all of us, Gwendolyn?
Okay, good. It's actually, you're right that we practiced this yesterday a little bit, and I realized that I really wanted to introduce myself first as a mother and a wife and a daughter and a sister as a Black woman, because those are things that I feel like are the most central to why I am who I am and why I'm sitting here with you today. But I am the co-founding director and CEO of Multicultural Bridge, which was founded 12 years ago in the Berkshires, and really, again, rooted out of my experience and experience of other newcomers in our county. As a medical mental health interpreter, I was seeing parallel experiences between my Black experience and the immigrant experience in the Berkshires. When I came to the Berkshires through Simon's Rock at 15, I was a math major and then an art history major. And so somehow through my life experiences, I ended up falling into this role as a racial justice and equity leader and cultural competence trainer, because that really felt like the only thing that I could do. I couldn't actually be any of these other things without doing that first. At this point, I just want to share that my work is about heart-centered leadership and humanity. I feel like I saw these beautiful words in the chat, and it is a hopeful time, but it's only if we can see each other in our full humanity, whether we wear a police uniform and a vest and a gun, or whether we're in Black skin or white skin. We have to really come from the heart to be able to move our country to where we need to be. And I feel like that's what drives me the most. And as I sit on this panel, I said yesterday, I just want to honor the work of Norman Rockwell and honor the intentions of people that have come before us, but we have to think about the 4 freedoms for all people, not just for white people. And I think that was the misstep when FDR created this, and because there were other parallel historical moments that were in contradiction. So I think that's why I'm here, is to be able to kind of help us enter into hard conversations with heart. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gwendolyn. And man, don't you wish like all introductions were like this? I feel like it's so much more authentic and enjoyable. That was my 2-minute warning timer that you just heard there. But next on our program, I do have Laurie Norton Moffat, who did introduce herself in some ways. But Laurie, I invite you to unmute for just a moment if you wanted to share a little bit more about the lens of the lived experience that you are bringing to the table today.
Thank you, Jen, and everyone. I'll just talk about the 2 bookends of my life, my early years and formative years, and then jump to more the last decade. I really grew up in mostly all-white neighborhoods. However, I grew up with an extended community of many different ethnicities, and my parents were each spouses of parents who thought the other nationality of their spouse was just the worst in the world, and that they had the only good daughter-in-law or son-in-law of those ethnicities. And I never understood this ridiculousness, and we had dozens of many different European American nationalities around me, and I just couldn't understand the prejudice. And in my school years, I did have a more diverse student body, and that seemed just normal in community. And so coming of age during the civil rights movement, as Liza was talking about, I really very naively, and looking back, thought we were emerging and growing up into a world that was moving beyond prejudice. And we didn't have all the same words and language for what how we talk about these topics now. But I really came of age thinking we've moved beyond this. And therefore, it's been very humbling in really probably the last decade of my life, as become more engaged in conversations of race, to actually awaken to realize my growing up experience was so very different from in working class neighborhoods, so very different from my Black brothers and sisters. And I actually didn't know it. I assumed everybody's childhood was like mine. I didn't know the structural racism divisions in our nation to the extent that we understand them now. And that has been a real process of awakening, and it's happened through conversations, close conversation with trusted friends and people. And I just continue to want to do this work and help everybody find their place on the journey to awaken, to understand the issues that divide our world and hold people's lives back. And I hope this is just a small little step on that journey for some of us.
Well, Laurie, thank you so much for continuing to take those steps. And I think that is the struggle of walking the path, right? That we think we've walked through this in history. We think we've emerged. We think we've become better. And then we realize maybe we haven't walked so far away from the atrocities and the practices of our past, that we still have a long way to go. Next, we have another one of our luminary artist joining us, who I think it's so great to have artists here, because we were talking in our meeting the other day about having a different language. Language is that we use to communicate our thoughts and feelings are not just lingual, they're visual, they're tactile. Some of us move through dance and other motions. Jerry, Pinkney, please welcome yourself to our table.
Well, first, let me say how pleased I am to be able to contribute a contribution that what makes it so powerful is that we're all having this conversation now, not just here, but all over the world. I grew up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Germantown section, in de facto Philadelphia. I lived in a block that was all Black families. They had migrated from the South and found Earlham Street as a place they could settle. We were surrounded by white communities. That was in the 40s. In the 20s, I moved to Boston, out of art school, and beginning to try to figure out my own history. I would spend my energy and my time in chronicling the Black experience. I first started with the celebration, the contributions that people of color has been part of this fabric of America. That was easy. That was the easy part. But I also wanted to talk about Black family. I came from a very tight-knit family, and I wanted to have that speak and counteract some of the images that were fed to me about people of color. Not to be trusted. Goes on and on. The 60s was a time when the civil rights movement was gaining strength. I attached myself to that energy, and decided to continue that work. But Black history and Black culture in all its complexities, I started to deal in slavery. A challenging, difficult time for me. But I felt it was a calling to use my talent, my skills, to lend in the lifting up. And therefore, that's why I started with the celebration. But it was slavery where I began to understand American history. But still, it was from a distance. I went to the library, I went to the Schönberg. Later, I had some projects where I did spend time on the plantation life, but still I was looking in. The last couple of weeks have been trigger points to me. George Floyd's murder, I didn't see him. I saw all the images that I researched that came out of the brutality of slavery. That was a trigger for me. Because I thought that my work, my efforts, was going to somehow not necessarily repair, but maybe enlighten. And then I discovered we're right there. It never left. And that is true of every news, piece of news that I listen to now. They're all trigger points to where I thought we had moved away from. So this conversation, I welcome being here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jerry. And I think that's so important to acknowledge within ourselves, that feeling and what is moving us, or what is triggering us. And I think it's also important, that's why I wanted you all to share your lived experiences, because we don't see that when we approach each other in the sidewalk or read each other's names. And it touches a deeper point of ourselves, that we're all humans going through this. And so thank you for, Jerry and Gwendolyn, also for introducing yourselves as the human sides, the parents. We're all someone's children at heart. I'd like to now extend a welcome to our panelist, Pittsfield Police Chief Michael Nguyen, who's also an active member of our community and can tell us about the many facets that he brings to the table. Welcome, Mike.
Good evening. Thank you, Jen. I'm going to apologize up front. My webcam's a little off center and I'm struggling to keep you all in view while I do this. As Jen said, my name is Mike Nguyen. I'm a lifelong Berkshire resident. I actually live about 70 yards down the street from the house I grew up in. I'm also a biracial individual, Black and in my case Polish, but I grew up in an all-white family. I lost my dad at a very young age and was raised by my mom and stepfather. I went to all, well, not all, but predominantly white schools. And I was in the military before I had to come to terms with my Blackness. I got out of the military and came home to the Berkshires to finish my education and had no intention of working in law enforcement locally. I actually was aspiring to be a federal agent. And that didn't work out. One of the things that happened was I needed law enforcement experience to do that. And so I did what many unemployed recent college graduates do. I took a job closer to home. I was fortunate enough to join the Pittsfield Police Department. I joined law enforcement right after the death, the Rodney King incident and the injuries of Rodney King incident and the Los Angeles riots. And couldn't understand, given the training I received, how things like that were happening. So I've spent most of my 25-year law enforcement career as a trainer in a variety of topics, including physical skills and physical restraints. But I've been on the job for 25 years through many of the more recent incidents of police brutality. In 2003, I was sent to Quantico, Virginia to work with the Drug Enforcement Administration as a leadership fellow. And while I was there, that was the first time that I had to face the complicity of modern law enforcement in many historical atrocities, including anti-slave patrols and Jim Crow laws and the Holocaust. And that kind of tempered my my view. And after that, I committed to studying or training in more topics, including fair and impartial policing and procedural justice. I'm angry that we have to be having this conversation after all of the incidents of 2014 and 2015 and the commitment that we made as a profession to do better. But we still have to do much better. So I'm also a proud member of the Norman Rockwell Museum Board of Trustees, and so I'm honored to be here in that regard. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike. And I was realizing as you were making your introduction, I should probably be transparent about my own background. So very briefly, I will not take 2 minutes, but I'm an adoptee. So I was born in India and I was raised here in the Berkshires. I also have Polish, Irish, and Lithuanian heritage in my adoptive family. So I come to the table with a whole lot of otherness, being also a member and having friends and family from all different walks of lives and labels. So I'm thankful to be able to share that with you. So let's continue on with our evening. This next portion of our meeting, Roberta, did I get, my apologies, I skipped over my notes. So I have to go back to Ms. Roberta McCulloch-Dews, who is also a Norman Rockwell trustee. And she is a representative of the city of Pittsfield. So Roberta, my extreme apologies. This is what happens when I handwrite my notes instead of type them out neatly. So over to you.
It's okay, Jen. No worries. So I will keep it brief. I won't linger too long. But I am, obviously, I'm a Black woman, but I am an immigrant. I was born on the island of Jamaica. My family immigrated to this country when I was 2 years old, and I grew up in the Bronx. And I grew up in a setting, I mean, I love New York City. I grew up in a place where I saw people who looked like me. I went to school with people who looked like me. I had Black teachers. I had white teachers too, but I never doubted myself. I always knew who I was because I always had affirmations around me, people I saw and in my external landscape. So having a duality of perspectives between a very strong Caribbean background and an American background, that has infused who I am. One of my earliest memories, because in Jamaica, I was always taught that you didn't really have like racism, you had classism, because everyone was Black, but no one said necessarily that you're Black because everyone looks alike, but there were different modes to separate people. But when my parents came to this country, my earliest memory of racism was an instance where my dad was getting a degree. And I remember he didn't want to go to his ceremony because I believe he was supposed to be either the valedictorian or the salutatorian. And they gave it to someone else. And my father had earned it. And I remember there was this big commotion that he didn't want to go. And of course, later on in life, I found out why. But my father, from that point, and of my understanding and my brother's understanding, always stressed the importance of education, always stressed the importance of knowledge. It was a known thing to work twice as hard because the country that we're in. So even though America is the land of opportunity, there was still the mantra that you had to work twice as hard. Fast forward to today, my husband and I, we have 3 kids. They're first generation American. And I instilled the same mantra in them as well, but I struggle with respectability politics because I struggle with the aspect that they have to be perfect, right? So I want them to be good at what they do. I want them to excel, but I also don't want them to have to feel this added burden of perfection on them that makes them think that they have to go above and beyond just so that they can be okay. And that's my 2 cents.
And that is a powerful, valuable 2 cents, Roberta. So thank you so much for bringing that to the table. And thank you. I have to read Wendy Healy's comment that says, I saved the best for last. So thank you for that, Wendy. So tonight is about a dialogue. I want you to be able to do what some of you just did and smile as we have these tough conversations. We need to laugh. We need to keep breathing. We need to listen too. So for about the next 20 minutes, I'll be posing some direct questions to our panelists. Not everyone will be answering them, but as I ask questions, I invite all you in our audience to use that chat box and share some of your questions. And the second half of the next hour that we have, about 50 minutes or so, that's 50. I will be letting you all ask questions to these panelists, because I know I have a million questions, but I won't monopolize that. So that's how this evening is going to work. And then the evening will conclude when our panelists give our final remarks, but we also want you to leave with some tools as well tonight. So that will be something that will be shared later on, and we'll discuss that a little bit more. But, you know, Roberta, as I was listening to you, this question is for those of you who have, who are parents, who identify as parents. I'm curious about how, with your generational experience, are you having conversations with our new generation that we're seeing out in the streets or out in social media, or just maybe overhearing and seeing these days? You know, how are you bridging these conversations, and in what context? So Roberta, I'd like to start with you briefly, and then I'll move it around the room.
Sure. So one of the things that I will say is that while these events have been sort of mitigating factors, right? They weren't the reason why I've had these conversations. They have been commonplace in my house since the time my kids were little. And that's only because of some of the things that they experienced. I mean, I had to have a conversation, right, with my preschooler when she was told in school that others don't want to play with her because she's brown, right? Or when my kids are called the N-word. So for me, I never had to hide these things. These are very hard truths that I've had to speak with them about. I've had to think about how to talk to them though, because they can't necessarily process information the same way an adult would. So I can't share everything, but I also can't hide. And so from the time they've had an understanding, I've had to talk to them about race. I've had to talk to them about why certain people might not like other people, and what is the root of that. So while these events are happening, I think that they're an added level of discourse on top of the conversations that we're already having.
Gwendolyn, I see you nodding there. I'll ask you to join in.
I think that's it. I think I just need to snap. I mean, those of us that are mothers of African-American males, or just children in general, we've had to prepare our kids for the danger from the onset of them going to school, and for the possible interpretations of their movements and behaviors in stores and restaurants and on the street. So what we're seeing is what our daily life is, like what we're preparing our kids for. And it's sad, you know, but I think that, yeah, I think that's all. I don't really have any, Roberta said it all. As far as being a parent, it's very, you know, it feels sad when I reflect on it, but it's just normal, if I can say that, about how we've raised our children and how I was raised. And so I think that that is something that white people need to reckon with more than we need to reckon with, because it's been our reality. Yeah.
Thank you, Gwendolyn. Any other parents on the panel like to chime in?
Yes,
Jerry.
yeah, I would, because in a sense, I was born in 1939, and so I came from that place of this sort of understanding, and I don't think it was verbalized, but implied that I had to work twice as hard, be twice as good to be equal to white folks. And then we have married four children, and I think we sort of imparted that on them as well. We moved to the suburbs, back into the city to be around Black folks, and then back to the suburbs for what we thought to be better education. But I think we instilled that, and to navigate racism in a way that was in a skillful way. And that was true, I think, of our grandchildren. However, we have our great-granddaughter with us now, sheltering in place. And that's brought a newness, an awareness that how I had practiced and navigated my life was adhering to some aspect that was dictated to me. And the beauty of having my great-granddaughter here is I get a chance to go back and think about how I grew up and how she's growing up. And there is something incredibly powerful and informative to now see it in light of what's going on. Because not only are we talking about racism, we'll be talking about racism in its most violent form. And that brings something else to the table. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Do I have others who want to weigh on this question?
Well, don't really quite know how to answer it, or not that you're asking me to answer it, but I just want to contribute something. I have two daughters. They're 29 and 31 now. And I live part-time in New York City and part-time in the Hudson Valley. And we raised them in the Hudson Valley, which is, this particular area is pretty white, small town. When I was growing up in Washington, D.C., just on the edge of the district, in a white suburb, but I had Black friends because I went to a Quaker high school. So when the girls were growing up, we decided to, because we live in such a white area, I thought the best way to educate, I don't know if that's the right word, them about race was to send them to a diverse school, which was another Quaker school up here in the Hudson Valley. So I never really had a conversation with them, except every Martin Luther King's birthday, I would always bake a cake with them for him. So we didn't have overt conversations about race. Perhaps we should have, but I felt like they had friends in school that were different backgrounds, different colored skin, different nationalities. And so that's a way to learn about race for them.
Thank you, Liza. I want to extend this question actually over to Brooke, because Brooke has spent a lot of time talking with our local youth here through a program called Youth Link Up. And Brooke, I want to ask you this question in the frame of how are you telling these young people, what advice are you giving them to help them process these feelings? And what advice would you have for anyone to have this reckoning through a social and emotional lens?
Yeah, sure. That's a big question. So it honestly, well, last night I was a part of a conversation with you through Youth Link Up that was all about justice and equity. It was all about what's going on in the world right now. And I think to a certain extent, we don't give them enough credit for their actual logic, like the logic part of what's going on. A lot of them understand systemic racism. They understand that that's been going on. And so through a social emotional lens, what I try to offer is, okay, all of that's going on out there. Now, how do we deal with what's going on in here? Because, you know, they're like, we need to do something, and, you know, protesting is okay, and we should be stealing things. And then I'm like, you guys, you know, like because they get worked up in the anger, and they get worked up in just this feeling of betrayal and distress, and just, so what I always offer is just to sit in that. And it sounds counterintuitive. It sounds dumb to a lot of them at first, but just to be able to feel it, like be in it, feel the anger, be okay with it. We don't necessarily have to do something about the anger right now. But in my opinion, anger, I said this in a speech a little while ago, anger is like a bridge. It's a bridge to process. It's a bridge to the next steps, but we have to feel it in its fullness first. And we don't always have to act on it. So when they got into talking about, you know, like we should just, you know, be protest and loot, and like that was a big thing that kept coming up. I was just trying to remind them, like, is that the best idea? You know, it's all about thoughts, feelings, actions. Like, what are your thoughts? What are your feelings that are coming from that? And what is the action that's coming from that? And are you actually making a difference if you take this action that you're looking at? And they're really smart. When I was 15, 16, I was not even anywhere near as smart as they are. And I know that it has to do with social media and everything that they're seeing online. They literally cannot escape it. They're quicker than we are. They see it quicker than we do. They share it quicker than we do. So ultimately, what we talk about is just kind of feeling it. You feel it. You figure out what your thoughts are, what it feels like in your body, you know, what the emotion actually is. And then you know, figure out how to, which path is the best. Is looting really going to get you to where you want to go? Or you just turning 18 and being able to vote? Is that going to get you to where you got? Well, you know, like just weighing the options. And surprisingly, they're like really more open to hearing about it than most adults are. And also, you know, I've had a lot of young white kids come to me that I've spoken to in the past, write me on Instagram, like, hey, this might sound weird, but I'm trying to check my white privilege. Can you help me? Can you send me some resources? And because these kids, they see what's wrong instantly, quicker than a lot of people do, because that bias, that internalized implicit racism is not necessarily there. They're a lot more open to just being involved in other people's lives and other people's cultures because of media and all of that. So ultimately, it's just about feeling it, figuring out what your thought process is, and then taking the appropriate action, but feeling it first and not feeling like you have to rush into action to make a change.
Thank you for that, Brooke. I really appreciate that insight, since we don't have a lot of we don't have any youth here on our panel tonight, and maybe that's the next session, because I think it's an excellent voice to hear. I was listening into that as well, and I just sat back and took a lot of not these kind of notes, but just I was feeling it myself. Mike Nguyen, I would love for you to weigh in a little bit about this, especially because some of the sides of the work that you mentioned in your training is to de-escalate some of these situations even before they start. And when you hear that young people are you know, having these feelings, you know, what's going through your mind, and how do you address that?
What's not going through my mind? You know, I had a hard conversation yesterday with Roberta related to a conversation I've had in the community, and you know, basically, it's, at the end of the day, you know, most days I can go home and I can take off my badge and I can take off my uniform, and depending on what my duty status was, I can take off my gun, but I can't ever take off my skin, right? I can't ever escape that. And so if I'm not in uniform and I'm out in the community, I have to deal with this institution and this systemic racism just like any other Black person. And so, you know, how do I convey to somebody who hopefully, through good recruitment and good background checks and good training, came to my profession for noble reasons, that we've got to confront this legacy head on. And so, we spent a lot of time in Pittsfield and in Massachusetts adjusting our training in the last 5 years to include a lot more history and a lot more cultural competency and a lot more, as I said, fair and impartial policing and procedural justice and looking at accountability and legitimacy, all of which is more important than how to stop a car, how to write a citation, how to put handcuffs on somebody. There are many, many, many angry police officers in this country right now because good police officers don't behave that way. And I want to train good police officers. My fellow police chiefs want to train good police officers. Like I said in my introduction, there's so much more work to do.
Thank you for that answer, Mike. I appreciate that. Again, as the time continues to fly here, I invite you all to submit your questions. I'd love to hear from this audience. But I do, before we fully open it up, I did want to check in with our artist, because I'd be remiss if I didn't recognize the fact that we're hosted by a museum. One of the things we talk about is how art can be used, not just in an aesthetic way, but in a way that evokes change. Liza, I'd love to have you weigh in a little bit first. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about, you do live drawing every day, and you obviously share your work through your multiple platforms. What sort of responses are you getting from people, and how has that changed your work, and does it make you see your work differently?
I think it is changing my work. I've only been doing this since the pandemic, although I do live drawing on my tablet out in the world when we can go out in the world. It's a different subject. But this time I started doing this just to connect with my audience on the social platforms by showing them my hand drawing something and talking about what is going on in the world at this moment and the different aspects of the pandemic. It started out being about the pandemic, and it's not planned in any way. It's more loose than that. It's more like I'm just stream of consciousness talking about it and drawing the frontline workers or the delivery people that are risking their lives delivering packages and the things like that. So, and then it changed to draw about Floyd. George Floyd. So it's a way to communicate, and I'm always trying to figure out ways to use my art to communicate with people, because that's what it's about. It's really about a dialogue. And I've done political cartoons over the years for the New Yorker and other places, but this is different. This is more about direct connection with people in a live format. I grew up reading Doonesbury, Gary Trudeau, Herb Bloch, these powerful political cartoonists and cultural cartoonists that talked about what was going on and what was wrong with our culture. So that's the model for what cartoons can do in terms of helping people see things and maybe change their behavior. It's different now with the social media. It's different now with the internet, because political cartoons don't always catch people's attention in the way they should. So I'm always struggling to find ways to have a dialogue with people. It's a long answer to your question, sorry.
Well, sometimes these questions, we're not all, we didn't show up to hear yeses or nos or maybes.
Yeah.
We can can fully admit to the answering I don't know, because I think none of us have the answers to everything.
Yeah.
But thank you for being willing to tackle that.
I think people like the honesty of the dialogue that I'm giving them. It's a personal thing. People like we're doing here. They like to hear people talk honestly and draw honestly and try to tackle with things. So that's what I try to do instead of coming up with a pat answer.
Thank you. Jerry, I'm going to go to you next. And this is a question from Linda Kelly, who is submitted. She asks, can you say a bit about more about what you are going through and are processing now as an artist and student of history? She says, I think there is a richness there, and I'd like to hear more.
Oh, well, I guess the thing that I should talk about is how I feel in terms of energy. Most of my work deals with this sense of letting my subject matter speak to me, and then I respond. In this case, it's interesting to know that the history of my art has really started to influence where I think my art should go. I'm still waiting and now anxious to see whether the energy of this moment in our history, how it will affect my work. I've always believed the idea and the role of the artist was to speak through, if the artist is a visual artist like myself, to speak through the work, that the environment or the landscape of the time affects and moves its way and finds its way into the art. I've started a memoir some 10 years ago now. I've been working on it of recent. I'm yet to find out how the events of today is now going to change, inspire, or motivate a new way of looking not only at my art, but my work. I'm both exhilarated, at the same time somewhat frustrated by the feelings that are necessary for me to keep making art. So I'm looking forward to this, how history plays out with and butts heads against, in my art, my visual art, against what is happening today. And I don't know what that's going to look like. I don't know what it's going to look like.
And I just before I pass the mic to Roberta, I want to say that there's some excellent responses happening in the box around affirming the ideas of safety and trust, comfort, are these considerations that are being discussed. Helena adds that admission costs may be a barrier to many potential museum visitors, and I know that's something that's definitely been addressed, but still needs to be done. Museum passes at libraries only go so far, so what else can we do? Roberta, what are your thoughts?
So everything has been said so eloquently, but what I can add to this is that when I first became affiliated with the Norman Rockwell, about 5 years ago now, Laurie, I came I wasn't a part of the board. I had some thoughts to share. And my thinking was this, again, the origins of the Passport program, that the Rockwell has worked on and implemented to create a safe space for people in the community, to broaden the reach of the museum to communities and groups that may not have participated in the museum before, is the idea that localized ownership, right? That if you are a child or a person of the Berkshires, there are certain things that you should have access to. And so while I wasn't using some of the language that I'm hearing today, which actually apply perfectly, my thought process really came from the standpoint of, again, if you're in the Berkshires, we're an area that we're home to all these cultural and art institutions. So many people come to this area to enjoy the very things that we have. And the reason why people can't enjoy them here are barriers. And we know the barriers run the gamut. So if we can identify the barriers, we can knock those down and get people in the doors. And there's always a balance, right? Because museums also have to make money, right? So it's a balance between the access and also keeping your doors open. But I think I know the Rockwell is committed to removing those barriers. And I know the Passport program, obviously we're in a pandemic, so it's not business as usual. But I know that there's work underway. There's steps in place right now to continue that program and continue the reach. And again, it's about access, right? It's about, to use the language of today, those safe spaces, places where people feel welcome, and that's what they're doing.
Thank you so much for all of that. Laurie, I see your hand raised. You'd like to add?
I did want to add, while we're on the topic of access, the Massachusetts Cultural Council created a wonderful program. Roberta, you're right, the library pass can only go so far, and checking it out and getting it and using it, and it really needed to be expanded. And so now there's a program statewide that any family that's receiving SNAP benefits and has their nutritional assistance card, which works like a credit card, can just come to the museum, pay, swipe that credit card, so it feels like they're a visitor like any other visitor, and can visit for free as many times a year as they want. And Norman Rockwell Museum was one of the first museums to have that, but it's throughout the state now, which has been a wonderful program that the legislature has helped to fund. I wanted to just touch on the idea of social norms also, because Gwendolyn mentioned that, and it's something that now that we're coming through this pandemic into a new way of behaving in the world, this is something museums are really struggling with, is to create a comfortable social space in a space that needs to be safe for our health. And in all the new norms that we are stepping back out into society, wearing masks and feeling safe for our health in a public space is yet another dimension that, in order to get our doors reopened, all museums across the country are wrestling with how to make it a fun and comfortable space, trusted space. I think that word trust is so important, but to feel safe for our health as well. So it's just yet another challenge of accessibility and trust.
Thank you for that. And I think there is, access has with it so many different factors and tags, right? Access means transportation. And while you can hop on a T to go anywhere from fine arts museums to Fenway in Boston, I don't think the BRTA stops at a lot of our cultural venues.
It actually does stop at Norman Rockwell Museum, Jen. The driver will drive right in and drop you off at the front door, but it can be a bit of a journey to get there.
It is. So there are issues like that. But as we talk about access and recognizing something, I'm also going to add some to create a question that I see from a couple of people's interest in dialogues, and something that I think some of our panelists in introducing themselves mentioned, that a lot of us come from multi-ethnic or multi-heritage background. We have a lot more children that have for lack of better terms, mixed backgrounds, mixed identities. You know, myself as an adoptee, you know, I have a transcultural background where I've experienced many different heritages. And so I'm wondering if people on the panel would like to address, you know, how within our work or our institutions or the organizations that we represent, do we acknowledge and support these different heritages? You know, I think some of the folks, Emily and Christina from our audience talked about, again, talking about different people's backgrounds that we don't know as much about. You know, we do have Black History Month, but we still don't have Asian American History Month, or we don't know enough about a lot of indigenous cultures. So how, again, do you think we can elevate and recognize the terminologies, the histories of these additional cultures in the work that we do? Let's see, does anyone want to go first?
I was just typing in the chat. Is someone else going?
Start away, Gwendolyn.
I was just writing something in the chat, so I could just leave it there. But I noticed how you point out African American History Month, and we always like to point out as African Americans, it's the shortest month of the year. We might get an extra day every 4 years. So it's really important that our American history really includes all of our history, right? Like, it is the indigenous history, it is the Asian American history, it is all of it. And I think that when we can just sort of get rid of that idea that there's separate histories, right? And then this is our one legacy, our one story to be told, I think we'll be better off, right? But when we have to do the extra exhibit on Asian Pacific Islander Month and the extra exhibit on Latinx Heritage Month and the February month, we're reinforcing a narrative that's that we're not all one, that we don't all share the same story. So that's just what I was gonna say.
Jerry? Oh, Jerry, we gotta unmute you.
All right, I'm back, right?
There we are. Hey.
I was thinking about that question, and I thought this on a personal level is, first I got to find out the biases that I carry within. That's one thing, because if you get rid of that and then you learn to celebrate your own culture, then you're open. That's the bridge of being curious about other cultures. So we start with ourselves, and then we dig inside to find out the value of ourselves, our family, our heritage, and then open it up to discover or want to explore the histories of other cultures and other people. So that's what museums are all about as well.
Thank you, Jerry. Brooke, I'm missing your voice right now, so I'd love to open up to you to share some additional thoughts if you have them on this topic.
Sure, yeah. So I think Jerry's absolutely right in getting to know ourselves. I know that was the biggest step for me, was just to know myself as a Black person and what that even means in the context of America, and what that means in the context of having a white mom with German background and blonde hair and blue eyes, and you know, my African American side of the family, you know. And I would have people say things to me like, oh, you sound, if I didn't look at you, I'd think you were white, and oh, you're so pretty for a Black girl, and all of these things that I didn't really, when I was younger, understand. I knew it was wrong, but I didn't really know why. So I think it's true, like being able to sit with ourselves and to know our history and to know the history of racism, which the systemic racism, the depth of the racism, I didn't really know until just the last few years. And then we can actually sit and have a true conversation with other people who may be curious about what our experiences as Black people what they're like. Because I know for a lot of Black people and Indigenous folks and other people of color, it's kind of, and trans folks and LGBTQ folks, for all people who are minorities or feel like they're othered, it's hard to feel like you have to share your experience with white people. You know, it's like, why do I have to take this on myself to share this with white people? But I think if we can be comfortable with our Blackness, with our Indigenousness, with our queerness, with whatever it is, we'll be able to more authentically, bravely, courageously, and kindly and compassionately have the conversations, because we're very clear and comfortable in who we are and the knowledge that we have around systemic racism. And then if we can do that, then the conversations won't even be bad. You know, they won't be as stressful. And same goes for white folks, for them to be able to know their own history. Because if you think about Americans, whether you're Black or white or Indigenous, we've all been stripped of our culture. You know, colonialism, like that's not the real culture of the white folks that came here. So what is your history? If you know your history, then we can all sit and be like, dang, we missed out. America kind of sucks. Like, how do we, you know, come back together and know the truth and see the truth and be authentic in our own truths and share the truths of other people? Like, that's how I think of it.
Thank you. This is generating, I mean, I can't even keep up with all the remarks in the chat anymore, so I'm not going to try. But thank you. You all are truly conversation starters, and I hope you are all conversation continuers. I do want to acknowledge, I think it's Don Janae's question about how the non-people of color here on our panel are investigating whiteness. And I actually want to pass the mic over to Liza, because we had a conversation the other day about how you realized that you didn't draw a lot in color. And I was wondering if you could share how you investigated that for yourself.
I don't remember what we talked about, but I think I was actually talking about just black and white versus paint. But still, there's an interesting thing to say there, because all the cartoons in the New Yorker they're mostly in black and white, but many of us people are cartoons with people of color by putting a grayscale on their faces or their bodies. That said, it's still a cartoon from my point of view. I'm a white woman, and I can make the person talking a black person, but I'm talking, it's my voice really. I cannot speak as a black person. When I was first drawing, I never thought of myself as a woman cartoonist, but a cartoonist who was a woman. And so I would just draw cartoons. I didn't think about being a feminist cartoonist. I'm just making a parallel here. And then I decided, well, because I have a voice, I should maybe draw about what it's like to be a woman, and make my characters speaking women. So I can do that because I'm a woman, but I can't really do that as a black person. And now the New Yorker has a lot more people of color drawing cartoons, which is fantastic. And I think there's a couple people that are really investigating those what it's like to be in their skin, and putting it in their cartoons, something that I'm not able to do. I can people my cartoons with different skin tones, but I can't speak in that way. So I'm investigating my whiteness with these daily drawings. I'm trying to figure out how I can express, not in a New Yorker cartoon necessarily, but in other ways, how I can express my compassion or my feelings towards what's going on right now.
Thank you, Liza. Laurie, did you want to address the question of how you're investigating your whiteness?
Thanks, Jen. We've been running a little chat conversation around that topic, and I think that you know what I shared in my personal journey, the you know, very late awakening in life to understanding that not all of our upbringings were the same, and that there were and are structural racism structures and policies in this nation that are designed to advantage some people and disadvantage other people. I think reading voraciously, reading widely, there are extraordinary books available that are written by so many different voices that I just think each time I read one, there's a blossoming, a flowering of awareness and understanding that I maybe didn't have before. And also, there's a wonderful tool for talking about race on the website of the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. It just went up on May 31st this year, but it's a whole curriculum on how to hold conversations on race. And there's a wonderful section in it on whiteness and really asking questions about one's own journey and coming to understand how this country has been structured around virtually everything about being white. So it's a journey, and I don't think it's ever completed. And I think we each step onto that journey coming from unique places. And it's a process, it's humbling, and it's also very invigorating, I think, toward realizing that understanding helps break down some of the barriers and create new systems, new laws, eliminate, or voter gerrymandering, and create financial access for people of color and things that just have not been available or lined up to support and advance lives of people of color and various immigrant populations over the history of the country, as was just mentioned.
Thank you, Laurie, and thank you, Danye, for that powerful question, and my apologies for mispronouncing names. I'm reading quickly here. We actually have only 7 minutes on the clock left for this conversation, and man, I wish we had like 70 more. But I do. There were. I think people are looking right now for, we hear the question, what's next? And so I'd like to ask one last question, because there have been several, and I'd be remiss if I didn't pose this, and this would be to you, Chief Nguyen. There's some questions around defunding the police, about reform, and I'm curious if you could just talk a little bit about, what do you envision moving forward, and
Okay.
what are your best hopes from all your training and experiences?
So I've been answering this question a lot, and I've been on a separate chat on the Q&A, and I want to make sure that I address that question specifically. But as far as the defund the police movement, I'm going to answer this from a position here in the Berkshires. We're very remote from our seat of government. We don't have a whole lot of resources. The Pittsfield Police Department is the most resourced police department in the county, and even we don't have what some of these larger cities have. And I said in a public response today, many of our community partners that work on issues of poverty, homelessness, substance abuse, mental illness, they rely on us as a point of contact. And so, if you defund your Berkshire County local police departments, you're actually going to have a negative impact on the existing structures that we have worked really hard to put in place, like our co-responder program with the Brian Center, so that police officers aren't the first responder to a mental health crisis instead of a clinician. But the other part of that is, what's next? And part of my frustration, particularly for the last 5 years, but for most of my career, is a lack of understanding that many local decisions about the type of law enforcement that I can provide, or I can have my officers provide, are constrained by federal regulations or federal legislation. And we've done a lot of local improvements on the back of some broken federal standards. So we're happy to keep doing work to improve locally, but if we don't make a concerted effort to put some rigorous national standards in place, I fear we're just going to keep repeating this cycle. There's 18,000 police departments in this country. That means there's 18,000 different policy manuals and there's 18,000 different training curriculums. That doesn't exist in any other industry. It can't continue.
Thank you for answering that, and I can only imagine it's a tall order. You know, short and simple, and yet we all have that role, that responsibility, not to give up on that hope that change can be made, and that there are steps to do so. I just put in the chat box, and I know that it's scrolling fastly and furiously, because this has been such an amazing conversation. But I've asked you all to think about what's the one thing you can do in your own work, your own roles, whether it's as a human role in a family structure, or in a professional setting, or as a member of a neighborhood, to affect change in the terms of justice and equity. So I ask you all to think about that for a moment, participants and audiences alike. For our audience members, I would love for you to be able to answer that question in the chat box. And after we just take a few minutes to think about that, well, we don't have so much few minutes, but we'll take just a moment, a quick minute to think about that. And I'd like the panelists to address that as part of their closing remarks. You know, for me, I'll fill the silence for a minute until I give you some thinking space. But for me, it's just taking in this conversation. And that's the conversation that we've had out loud, the conversation we've had on chats. Who else are we missing at the table tonight? Who else do we need to bring into that conversation? In my work in newsrooms that are meant to amplify voices, we're still not that diverse. There's not many of us that look like me there, and that needs to change. We bring our shared experiences, our lived experiences to the work that we do. As I'm asking questions, I'm just reading. I see Kristen Vandenhoven says, work rigorously to decenter whiteness is one thing she'll commit to. And so I'm going to go ask in reverse order from our folks, in order of introductions, to each take a minute to make final remarks and share that action with the rest of the group. So Chief Nguyen, I know you were just speaking a lot, but I'll ask you to share your reflection.
Actually, I think Roberta was supposed to go first because you forgot her, but I'm happy to. You know, I've been a police officer for 25 years. I've been the chief in Pittsfield for going on 13 years. I've spent most of my career focusing on improving the Pittsfield Police Department and working locally. And in the last several weeks, I've had to send a lot of messages to my colleagues across the Commonwealth and step into a wider conversation. As a chief who is also a use of force instructor and a physical skills instructor, I had a unique perspective and I had to inform that conversation. And I'm going to keep informing the conversation on a wider note in the Commonwealth and beyond.
Thank you for sharing that, Roberta. I was going to save you for last again, but I was just like, no, I got to go with the momentum. I'm going to go right to you.
Thanks, Jen. So I guess I have 2 points, and I will say that living with intention, and to whom much is given, much is required. And, you know, I work in local government now, but just like you, Jen, I started my career out as a newspaper journalist. And that is how I view the written word as a way to affect change. And that never left me. I carry that philosophy of impact, make it an impact, whether it's through the written word or engagement. I carry that through my professional career, as well as through things that I do on a community level. So one of the things that I know as a precursor to change is intention. You know, newsrooms stay homogenous because the intention is not there to diversify. Places of business will stay homogenous because the intention is not there. Conversations will not be had because the intention is not there. So whatever you do or want to do, whether it's to spark change in your family, whether it's to spark change in your neighborhood, whether it's to spark change on your job, first starts with intention. So for everyone out there who's listening as an attendee, if you want to ask yourself, what can I do? The first thing that you start off with is that intention, and then you take action, and then your action will manifest and turn into results. But you have to have the intention. That is your starting place.
Thank you, Roberta. And before I go to our next panelist, I'm just going to share with you some of the other commitments that I'm reading in the box here. I see Nancy Christian, who says, I commit as an educator to model my own work and deconstruction of my whiteness and how to implement change. I see Alina Sue, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, have conversations with my neighbors and family about whiteness and the impacts of racism at all levels. And Deidre, listening to others, sharing discussions, using art and teaching to reach out. We are made of our stories, so telling and listening is essential. It is important to be present in our progress. Jerry, over to you.
Well, I was listening to what everyone is saying, and I kept coming back to, for me, how do I learn to sit in two landscapes, the two landscapes, one of pain, the weight one carries in their body. The other landscape is hope and love. And so how do I navigate those two landscapes to make my action positive?
Landscapes, I like that analogy because we all traverse those multiple landscapes. To read a few more points from our audience, I see Jeff Lowenstein says, amplify the voices of people of color. Who else do I see? Karen Rees-Leon saying, encourage people to question what they take for granted, to think deeply and to be present with being uncomfortable. I am present that creating spaces like these is important for the work to happen. Gwendolyn, will you go next, please?
Yes, I just first want to say I'm really grateful for this conversation and the authenticity in it. And that's what I would say is that my personal commitment is just to lead with courageous authenticity. So whether it's to disrupt whiteness or white norms in a space or to name the things that don't normally get named, that's my commitment as long as I continue systemic racial justice work. It's really important to interrupt the interpersonal and the cultural ways that the systems are kept in place. So that's my commitment, is to continually disrupt with courageous authenticity.
Courageous, bravery, I think those are words I'm definitely taking heart tonight. So thank you for that, Gwendolyn. Liza, will you go next, please?
Sure, everybody's so articulate. It's wonderful. I'm speechless. No, not really, but I'm going to continue doing what I've been doing with this daily drawing and trying to see, like Jerry said, let my work speak to me and try to find where it takes me in this time, and not let it go, and investigate my whiteness and take those drawings also and write about it on Medium. I have a column on Medium, so I'm going to combine words, personal exploration and the drawings. Another thing I thought of was I've been working on another children's book, and I'm trying to investigate how I might explore this topic in a children's book. And then the other thing is I do a lot of panels and I curate panels and moderate them as well, and of cartoonists. And I would love to do a cartoon panel of different races. I mean, I've done panels, many panels, but have some of the newer, younger Black cartoonists on a panel with white cartoonists and see what kind of dialogue we can get into and expose some things. So those are my ideas.
So we have lots of things to look forward to and tune into and participate with. To read a few more, I see Emily Minkle, who says the ballot box. I love this. I'm trying to cut through the sound bites and slick advertising to focus on who is supporting unhelpful policies. Let's see, Elisa Costa, keep learning and keep processing and help others to do the same. Laurie, would you go next, please?
Thank you, Jen. I'm just really so humbled and touched by the honesty and authenticity of this conversation with everyone. And I guess that's actually one of my first aha moments when we at the museum thought last week, how can we help hold this conversation in the community and bring forward a forum, because it seemed that people needed places to express themselves. And we reached out to each of you. I was personally ignorant of the depth of what that was asking you to do today. And it was the honesty of your conversation, your remarks yesterday, of the deep personal pain and grief that you are each living through, and that you are still willing to say yes to this conversation, to bring a community together, to hold this conversation. And for the 160 or so people who have joined in and expressed their appreciation to have a place to talk about this topic, I thank you. And this is work that I hope the museum can keep doing in our authentic way. I also marvel that Zoom made this possible. We would not have had people from all over the country, as well as globally. There's a person from Belgium on the chat. I know there are people from Ohio. We were able to convene a much larger group than had we done this in the galleries, which we still can't get back into. And I'll just end my commitments with, we're thinking very deeply about what is a museum in the world today, particularly a museum in the time of COVID, where you can't be in the galleries with the art. And museums have collected billions of works of art all over the world. And for 3-4 months, people have not been able to come into the galleries to enjoy them. So I think we have opportunity here to convene in ways like this, to work to bring the meaning of art to people in new forms. But also not to forget how important gathering is and how much we miss it. And that, you know, my pledge is to try to be raising these conversations in all environments that I find myself where they're not happening. And I thank you all, my panelists, for being part of this conversation today and giving of yourselves so deeply and so generously.
I know it's, thank you so much, Laurie, for making the space, and thank you for everyone for making the time and commitment to be here. Man, I wish I could read these all. I'll read a few more before I hand it over to Brooke, but from Jody Shafroff, she says, first and foremost, personal reading for myself and my family and community. We have much personal work to accomplish. And for outreach purposes, I'm looking forward to COVID distancing ending and being able to reschedule Bridge coming back to Beckett Athenaeum for a community discussion we had scheduled in March. Libraries and schools should be two of many organizations that can be opened for these needed safe space discussions on race and gender. let's see, who else do I have? So many, just in case you're not all seeing this, so much gratitude for being here. I see a remark from Megan. I commit to continue to listen and educate, amplify voices that need to be heard with my platform and privilege. I will speak up, especially for humans that can't speak for themselves or are not being heard. There are so many people with disabilities, this is me talking, that we also need to continue to acknowledge and support when we think of access as well. And to Kira Smith, to participate in the community and advocate for change, to set an example and have more conversations with my children so that they grow up being actively anti-racist. Brooke.
Thank you so much. So as far as my commitments go, I will continue collaborating. Collaboration for me is one of the biggest parts of all of this. When I'm from Los Angeles, where there's 10 million people in the county. I never knew what it was like to be in a place like the Berkshires or like Pittsfield, where I could say something to one person and then have 7 people be like, oh, hey, this person said you talk about mental health. Want to come and be a part of this panel? I love it. It's amazing that we have these connections and we can all work together, and for me, I also really love realizing that I don't have to do it all. I realize where my strengths are, and I realize where there are other strengths in the community. I am an advocate for mental health, and I'm going to keep advocating for our mental health and advocating for us sitting in our discomfort. Whatever race you are, sitting in your discomfort and your feelings and your emotions and figuring out where they come from. Are they based on beliefs? Are they based on your parents? Are they based on your own interpretations? Are they based on your interaction with people? That's where I fit in, I think. And as long as I keep collaborating and keep coming to panels like this and collaborating with people who are maybe more active in fighting specifically for Black rights, because I am doing that, but in a more passive way. I'm the chair of health at the NAACP, and my focus is on our mental health. It's on who we are, on how we fit in. And I think I'm gonna stay committed to that, keep working in the spaces I'm working in, celebrating my Blackness, celebrating my joy, because, I think we forget that we don't have to talk just about the pain. Black magic is real. Like Black girl magic, like that's a real thing. Like if we celebrate our joy and what our Black culture actually is, that's also really, really powerful for people to see us at our fullest and to be able to engage with that in a non-appropriative way, but in an appreciative way. So that's what I'm gonna do.
Well, Brooke, I appreciate you, and this whole room does as well. And I appreciate everyone on the panel and everyone in the audience. Even if I can't see everyone's names, even if I mispronounce them, I apologize. That's another aspect of my learning I have to go through. We all do, but this has been wonderful. And, a couple of just final thoughts. I'd like to close out this session sort of the way that we opened it. So I'm wondering if we could all take a minute to think of one word that describes how you're feeling right now. And then on the count of 3, either through unmuting or through that chat box, let us know, let's share how we feel. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
Hopeful.
Energized.
Energized.
Charge.
I'm loving that at least I got to see all our panelists smile again. And I'm hoping you at home are smiling along with us. So let's take one more deep breath together. So breathe in. And a nice exhale. Let it out. I'm hearing that there is so much enthusiasm and thirst and excitement for this conversation. So whether it's here, again, whether we reconvene in this space or whether you convene your own space, we all have friends, we all have neighbors, we all have people in our communities we want to get to know better. Invite them to the table. Ask those questions, don't be afraid. When we close out, we'll be sharing a slide of some resources that were offered up by this group, by all our panelists. I think most of us are also pretty, as the term goes, Googleable. Did I say that correctly? So hopefully you can all find us if you have more questions to have one-on-one conversations. I invite you to do that as well. Take note of who you interacted with the chat and see if you can follow up. But there's a great resource that Roberta had shared about how do you have a conversation about race, because it's not easy and there's a lot of layers. We have resources like Bridge. We have our supports like Brooke Bridges organization, which combines building bridges, SEL. Did I get that, Brooke? We have art, we can tune into live drawing, we can read Jerry's books, we can learn more about Mike's work, and we can count on the Norman Rockwell Museum for continuing to do its part to be that space that we can all know and love and come to be inspired and to have these conversations. So thank you again, everyone, for being here, and I hope you have a wonderful evening. Be well.